When we are born, the planetary gods who are at that time on duty as ministers of birth take charge of us. These particular powers that change according to the rotation of the planets make their way in through the body and mold the shape of our souls. Salutations from space, folks. This is Gemini Brett, the astrolonaut of More Than Astrology. Pour some tea for you and me, and for the great Messenger Mercury, Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Thoth, Djuti. And Mercury is retrograde right now. So of course, all of my words will come out incorrectly. And the computer will most likely explode before I finish recording this transmission, right? Wrong. Or perhaps. But this is a short talk about Mercury retrograde. What is it? What does it do to us? And what can we do about that? How can we not get played by the Mercury retrograde? And so I pour tea for 3 planets, Mercury, the Earth, and the Sun. For we need to speak about the dance, the relationship between all 3 to look into what a retrograde is. The Sun, a planet, you say? Fiddlesticks! We know it's a star. But really, planet means moving star. And so from Earth's view, where we live, the moon and the sun, which the ancients knew as planets, are indeed planets. They move against the background of the fixed stars. Well, so much has changed in the way that we view the planets and the stars and the cosmos since the days of old. But has our astrological perspective and participation changed along with it? This fear of a retrograde cycle, perhaps it exists because back in the day, no one could understand why the heck a planet would go retrograde. Why suddenly, after moving in its normal direct motion through the constellations of the zodiac, it would stop and turn around and start moving backwards. And of course, we fear the things that we don't understand. But speaking of moving backwards, Mercury retrograde is a wonderful time to reflect and to look into our past and into the information of the deep past. So that passage I read at the beginning of this recording was from the Hermetica. And if you're not sure what the Hermetica is, well, let me read this to you. This is from the preface of The Way of Hermes. In the year 1460, a monk brought a Greek manuscript to Florence. The monk, Leonardo of Pistoia, was one of the agents that the city's ruler, Cosimo de' Medici, had sent to scour Europe's monasteries for forgotten writings of the ancients. And what he now brought his patron was a codex containing 14 treatises attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, an ancient Egyptian sage. This work's arrival caused a great stir because Hermes, identified with the ibis god Thoth, was held to be older than Plato and Moses, and the underlying inspiration of all philosophy and religion that followed him. Cosimo immediately instructed his scholar Marsilio Ficini to suspend his project of translating the complete dialogues of the divine Plato so that he might undertake a translation of this even more significant work. To Hermes, Thoth, the ibis god of Egypt, who is really in Egypt, the land that the Egyptians called Kemet, Djuti. And Djuti, Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, it is said, created language and communication and writing and thought in many ways, astrology, astronomy alike. So in these Mercury retrograde times, when we are asked to reflect, recall, remember, perhaps one of the words we should re-examine is respect. Caroline Casey recently hipped me to this when I sat with her this month in DC. That respect, which of course means to have a great admiration for, also means to look again. Spect, to look, and again. So isn't that interesting? And maybe we should take another look at this ancient wisdom and really revise the way that we astrologize. So here's a statement from that same passage of the Hermetica I was reading from at the beginning of this recording, called The Universal and the Particular. These the words of Hermes. The human body is an earthly temple constructed by the power of the zodiac, which makes myriad forms from simple archetypes. There are 12 signs of the zodiac, and the forms they produce fall into 12 divisions. They are, however, inseparably united in their action. Nature makes the human body so that its constitution resonates with the patterns of the stars, in such a way that they mutually affect one another. That they mutually affect one another. So the words of the great Hermes, the underlying words behind all philosophy and religion since, tell us that we affect the stars, we affect the planets as much as they affect us. Of course this is true. Everything is relationship. So we say the sun is no longer a planet, it's a star because Earth orbits it. But later we realize actually they orbit each other. It's all relationship. And so we look at this relationship of the planets, Mercury, Earth, and the sun, to learn more about Mercury retrograde. So we don't get played by Mercury retrograde. It's time for us to play along, right? Because we affect Mercury as much as Mercury affects us, according to Mercury himself. So what does it mean? What kind of results are we going to achieve when we all fall into this fear-based tactic of Mercury's retrograde? Our computers will explode and we can't travel because the plane will explode, or my car's tire will get flat, and never sign a contract as surely it will be a loss for you, and all of these things that we hear about Mercury retrograde. Communication itself will fail. My feeling is that the planets miss us. They used to get a lot of attention from us in this relationship. And for a long, long time, we very much ignored them. Even astrologers who know the planets on paper often don't know the planets in the sky. And the astronomers who know the planets in the sky don't understand their psychological participation, their character, how they are a piece of us. And so Mercury, who I feel is missing us, and missing this connection that he used to have with humanity. Here's his name called upon 3 times a year, 3 weeks a time, these Mercury retrograde cycles. And he says, oh, they're talking to me. And what do they want? They want me to break their computers and destroy their travel plans and bring about entire communication breakdown, mess up their contracts and commerce. Okay, if that's what you guys want, I'm here to help. When things blow up, right? So maybe as we reflect on the way that we respect the great Hermes, thrice great, we can renew our relationship to this great god, the ibis-headed Thoth. And instead of asking him to provide communication breakdowns, we can ask him to support the beauty of communication. And instead of asking the God of travel in the crossroads to screw up our travel plans, perhaps we can ask him to support them. The messenger, perhaps we can ask the messenger for a new message, for guidance moving forward. And speaking of moving forward and moving backwards, well, let's take a look at what a Mercury retrograde cycle is astronomically. You're looking at a view of our solar system on May 18th, 2015, which was the day when the current Mercury retrograde cycle began. This image comes courtesy of Solar System Scope, a wonderful astronomy software you can play with online for free. And here I will zoom in to the inner solar system. And we can see Earth and Moon and Mercury and Sun all here. And so what you notice about Mercury is that it is approaching conjunction, okay? Or the place where it's just between Earth and Sun. I'll play this in time, and that conjunction point happens on May 30th, right there. And then the retrograde period ends on June 11th, right there, okay? And so what we're seeing is that retrograde Mercury happens when Mercury is passing the Earth in space. This is true for the inner planets. If you look at the image now, this is Venus retrograde, right? Venus passing the Earth. And the outer planets retrograde when Earth passes them. It's just like when we pass a car on the highway, it appears to be moving backwards for a time. It's an optical illusion. So now that we understand the heliocentric solar system, looking now, there's another Mercury retrograde, another Mercury interior conjunction with Earth and Sun. Now that we understand that our solar system is heliocentric, we understand why planets move retrograde. And so we should not fear the things we understand as we feared them when we didn't understand them. And why are we still working with Mercury retrograde in such a fear-based way, then? We're looking at the image now. Here comes the next, all right? And so what do we see about Mercury retrograde? It's when Mercury is passing Earth, and that means it is closest to the Earth. You know, when Earth passes an outer planet, as on the screen you can see right now, it's approaching the pass of Jupiter in February of 2016, then that outer planet is brightest in the sky, closest to Earth, brightest in the sky, because it's in opposition to the sun. But when the inner planets pass us, they are not brightest in the sky because they disappear. They are lost in the glare of the sun. I'll show you this here with this Mercury retrograde about a year from now. Okay, when we look to see Mercury during the retrograde times, all we're going to see is the sun because Mercury is there in between. So one more thing I want to say about this. We just watched Mercury. I'll go fast forward. In its movement, there's a retrograde. And here's a retrograde, right? This happens 3 times a year. Mercury's sidereal cycle, or its orbit of the sun, is 88 days long. It's fast, the speedster, the messenger, but his synodic orbit, okay, which speaks about the dance with Earth and the sun, is 116 days on average. So these points where Mercury is in between the sun and the Earth, like they're 116 days on average in between. Multiply that by 3 and you get just about a year. So we have 3 Mercury cycles a year. And during Mercury's cycle, he spends about 3 weeks in retrograde motion as he's passing the Earth, as he is here. Now there's this other point of the cycle, okay, where Mercury is on the exact opposite side of the sun as the Earth is. Now this is not an astrological opposition, okay, that's like this point, right? What that is also a conjunction. We look to the sun, or we look to Mercury and all we see is the sun. In fact, at this time, Mercury's not retrograde, But his light is entirely lost to the earth, behind the sun. Okay? And shamanic astrology, which is the stock of my starry stew, we consider a planet being lost to the glare of the sun as that planet descending into the underworld. We imagine this is how the ancients would have seen this. Where did it go? Must have disappeared into the underworld. And so that happens when Mercury is in an interior conjunction, like this, when he's passing Earth, and Mercury is therefore retrograde. It also happens, and for a much longer period of time, when Mercury is in the exterior conjunction, on the other side of the sun. Mercury in the underworld. And of course, this was one of Mercury's gigs as a god. Psychopomp. He would take the souls of the dead to their new home below. And on a spiritual level, we can also think of that as Mercury taking our consciousness within, into the interior earth, the inside of ourselves, into the heart, into the soul, into our underworld. So let's talk about what Sun and Earth and Mercury are spiritually in their relationship. And the Sun is source. It is the source of light. And the microcosm of creation that our solar system is, Sun is spirit. Now the sun has a sun, and that sun has a sun, and that can go on and on and on. But here in local space, the sun is source. The sun is spirit. Now Earth, of course, is home. The temple, the body in which we come incarnate into for our experience here in the system. And Mercury's job is to convert the spirit of source of the sun into something that we can actually use and experience. Mercury is nous in the Hermetica, or Thoth, thought, consciousness. It's like electricity, right? Electricity is the use or the conversion of energy in such a way that we can use it for power. And this is Mercury, consciousness, that helps us convert spirit into such a way that we can use it for unfoldment and evolution here in the Earth game. And what if we honor Mercury as such, and do so especially at these times of retrograde? Thrice great, he's called, right? 3 cycles a year, 3 weeks at a time when he is retrograde. And these retrograde times are when Mercury is closest to Earth. So if planetary proximity has anything to do with the way that their energies participate with our own, and ours with theirs, then the relationship with Mercury at the time of retrograde should actually be emphasized and increased. Is that why your computer blows up? I say no. I say in many ways because that's what we are asking Mercury to do when we are taught to fear these times. Because yes, we do statistically notice that there can be disruption in the items mercurial during Mercury retrograde. I often notice more sirens during the Mercury retrograde periods, and I've wondered if more people die then, because Mercury, the psychopomp, is in the underworld and is so close to Earth. I mean, he's only a stone's throw away, so long as that stone is Venus. And I have missed planes, and I have had flat tires, and I have had utter communication breakdowns. But that happens all the time. I recently had a computer failure, but it wasn't with Mercury retrograde. Mercury was direct. That happens all the time, too. And Mercury was not, at that time, even in this newly infamous shadow period of Mercury's cycle. In fact, here's the chart of when my computer broke down. It was just after the Aries new moon, April 19th, 2015. And here's Mercury in Taurus, conjunct Moon and Mars. They're all in the underworld, all so close to the sun that they couldn't be seen. They're squaring Jupiter, they're trining Pluto, there's all sorts of stuff here. But Mercury is direct, it wasn't retrograde. I'm personally in a transit known as Pluto square Mercury. Mercury is my perfected Lord of Time this year, and it's a Mercury synodic return year for me as well. So if you speak astrology, you'll know that Mercury is very much emphasized for me. And as Gemini rising, many would say Mercury is the ruler of my chart anyway, and he's a great guide for me. But what's Mercury saying at this time when I broke my computer? Mercury in Taurus and making all of these incredible alignments. Well, let me tell you how it happened. I was on the phone and I was just kind of aimlessly flailing my arms about, and I had in one hand my iPhone charger, which was plugged in, and for some reason I stuck this charger in the USB port of my computer while it was also running and plugged in, and everything went black. And I was like, uh-oh, I gotta go. And I can't really afford a complete computer failure right now, which this looked to be. But I didn't get down on myself. I didn't freak out. I said, all right, what is the lesson in this? Because there's always a lesson, right? And I actually looked at the chart I had already that morning, but I looked again, and I said, oh, here is Mercury in Taurus, and the moon is right there. And what is Mercury in Taurus? Okay, this is the body mind, and the mind of nature, and in many ways, simplicity. And here I was on my computer almost for 2 days straight when it was beautiful outside in the Seattle spring. And I said, okay, lesson number 1, shut the computer down and get outside and enjoy the beauty of nature, or the computer will shut itself down. Lesson number 2, know your body. Here I am just flailing my arms around on the phone, not really thinking of what I'm doing. I'm holding power in my hand, and I create this computer failure. But why? So that I will contemplate these very important things that I apparently was not. So even before I took my computer to the shop, I went to the park and lay down in the sun and actually fell asleep there and had this beautiful dream. And then I went to the shop. And I brought it in and I said, here's the deal, waving my arm around, iPhone charger, thing went black. What's happening? And they said, well, we'll have to look, but typically that's your motherboard. So the motherboard. And so what kind of money are we talking about with that? They said, oh, it's about $700 or $800. Like, ooh. And that's definitely not something that's in my financial budget at this time. Is it in any of ours? So I said, okay, but what else could it be? Let's think a little cheaper. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, it could be like capacitors, right? She said, yeah, it could be capacitors. And when we open it up, that would be really easy to see. And that would be cheap, but it would take weeks to fix because we don't keep those in stock. And I said, okay, well, what else? And she started to play along with me at this point, though I'm sure thought I was crazy. And she said, well, it could be the battery. The battery's about $80, and we keep those around. Easy fix. So I said, all right, let's go with battery. She kind of giggled. I paid $40 to check it in and took off and went back to the park. And then didn't have my computer for a couple of days, which was very cool because I use my computer in many ways when I do astrology readings and calculations, and I had to do them in more old school ways using the ephemeris, the book, and otherwise, and it was really good for me actually. And I wasn't sitting by the phone waiting for this call. In fact, when it came, I missed it, but I heard a voicemail. I said, Mr. Joseph, we've got your computer fixed, and we were able to save it. All it needed was a discharge, and it cost me $20 on top of the $40 that I paid when I dropped it off. Now, I'd been intending to bring my computer in to have it cleaned because it's been getting very hot, and they did that during this repair. and they also sped up my processor. So all of these great things happened. It's like my computer decided it was going to take itself in and use my disconnect from my body-mind to help it achieve this mission. So I share this long story because I think this is, in many ways, what Mercury is here to teach us. Now, sure, Mercury is a planet. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, Mercury is a god. But both that planet and that god, or that netter, that principle, they are parts of us, right? As within, so without. And Mercury is this part of us that is our consciousness. And so when I was talking earlier about the microcosm of our solar system, and the sun as source, and the earth as home, and Mercury as this kind of electric device that converts spirit into something that we can use, this is all happening as well in the microcosm of creation that is us, right? And Mercury represents our consciousness. And how do we turn spirit, right, and the formless into earth, into the form? And so we're learning this more and more, right, that we manifest our reality, that thought is creation. And I believe when Mercury is retrograde, we have this opportunity in an enhanced way to really practice around that manifestation, if only by contemplation. So how to not get played by Mercury retrograde? Well, we play right along. I mean, in his own words, Hermes tells us that we have as much effect on the planets as they have on us. What kind of effect are we having on Mercury when we choose to live in this fear-based way for his retrograde 3 weeks, or in this anger, or to use him as some kind of scapegoat? Are you serious? Let's rewrite that relationship. Let's play along. So, 3 retrogrades a year, 3 weeks a time, and 3 things I'd love to say about that. 1, Mercury's proximity. Again, Mercury retrograde brings him between Earth and Sun as close as he gets. And it's like the messenger in the throne room of spirit, you know? So a new spiritual message is available, but working with that proximity to say, okay, this is a time where Mercury is close. What is Mercury? Where is he now? Where is Mercury in my chart? How is he aspected? What are the transits to Mercury now? Right? And so all of this kind of astrological intrigue is wonderful because Mercury created astrology. But perhaps even more important, astronomy, getting out, looking up, seeing the stars, looking down, seeing the earth, participating in the marriage of heaven and earth. And getting out of the computers and out of the written language and more into the symbolic. Now, of course, we can't do that 24 hours a day. There's work to do and whatnot. But you'll be amazed at how much you can learn just by staring at the glyph or the elements or the planetary glyphs in these times. And speaking of 3, Mercury's glyph is the only one that has all 3 elements: the crescent of soul, the circle of spirit, and the cross of matter. So how about that? And just contemplate that for some time, right? Or if you are going to read, why not check out the Hermetica, or the Way of Hermes, or the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and honor Mercury for his own teachings during his proximity. So Mercury is close, developing this power of consciousness as manifestation as well. Just have some exercises around that, you know? We all have understood the synchronicities of thinking about somebody we haven't thought about for a long time, and then they call, or they walk around the corner, or whatever. But have you ever tried to do that purposefully? Have you ever just sat in meditation on somebody's face for 15 minutes and seen if they show up, right? So that could be a great thing to do during these 3 weeks of Mercury retrograde. Really focus on one person and see if they show up, or one thing. But maybe even more importantly, one specific creation you might want to bring forth. The traditional systems are saying never create something, never sign a contract, don't make important decisions. Fiddlesticks. I say do exactly that, but play along, right? So it's not, hey, Mercury, we're going outside, we're shutting down the computers because we know you will destroy them if we don't. That's fear-based. It's Mercury. We're going to go outside and get into this other side of our mind, right? And that's another part. This is Mercury in the underworld, which brings us into our own underworld, into the heart, into the soul, shifting from the left side to the right side, from the conscious waking reality to the symbolic dream world, the super consciousness. And come out there and say, we do this to participate, to play with you, not in some fear that you will strike. And as long as we're playing, perhaps can open the space for you to send a message, right? And even if we want to get very specific about this, perhaps there's a very specific creation we want to bring forth. And Hermes, will you help with this? And even further, if you really want support, maybe making some space for Mercury's guidance or teachings or support to come in by fasting from something. Here's something that I will release for 3 weeks to make some room for you to come in with your guidance, with your support. That can be longer than 3 weeks. We can work from the beginning of the shadow period to the end of the shadow period, if you know what that means. It's the same thing as Mercury's brightest height in the western sky until Mercury's brightest height in the eastern morning sky. So from his height in the sunset to his height in the morning, this is this longer period where Mercury is retrograde for 3 weeks in between. And one thing that Gary Caton, a wonderful friend and mentor and astrologer, has showed me is that another thing about thrice great Mercury is that those 3 places where Mercury is at his sunset height in the evening sky, the conjunction with the sun, and then his morning height, they happen relatively almost at the exact same point of the zodiac. And so we can really hone in on that space too. What does that place mean, and how can we align our creations to that for support from Mercury? So, 1, the proximity of Mercury magnifying the power of our consciousness. 2, Mercury in the underworld, going within, right? Honoring the subconscious, the dream, opening that side, getting out of the language, getting more into the symbolic. And 3, yes, Mercury moving backwards, moving retrograde. And so we go retro. And so we see all of these wonderful posts from astrologers these days. Remember, recollect, reconnect, rewire, recharge. All of the words. But one thing I would say for sure, rewrite the way we retrograde. And this is a wonderful time to do it. This particular retrograde cycle in which I'm recording this with Mercury in Gemini, the sign in which he is perhaps most at home. Mercury retrograding in the stars through the constellation of the Bull, which brings forward the great story of the first day of Hermes' birth when he steals Apollo's cows and walks them backwards. And I'll be sharing that story soon in the creation that I've asked Hermes to help me with during this retrograde cycle, which is my new podcast, the Starry Telling Podcast. So more on that soon. But for now, let's get out in nature, shut down the computers, and think with our dream minds, and carve out a space for Mercury to come dance, teach, and guide. Thank you for watching. Don't get played by the Mercury retrograde. Play along. Sing a song. Do your dance. I will see you in space. This is your friendly astronaut, Gemini Brett, signing off. love, and planet.